Before the endless ocean, John was just an ordinary high school student. He lived a normal life, going to school like everyone else. He never imagined that everything would change in a single moment, but suddenly, a strange blue light appeared. Before John could understand what was happening, his entire world began to disappear. In just a few seconds, his ordinary life was completely taken away. When John opened his eyes, the world he knew was gone. Instead of a classroom, he found himself floating in the middle of a vast ocean, standing on nothing but a small wooden raft. With no land in sight, John searched everywhere, left, right, even beyond the horizon, but all he could see was endless blue water. No people, no buildings, no way home. Just as fear began to take over, a strange blue screen appeared in front of him. It was not a phone. It was not a computer. It was something completely unknown. A survival system. The message on the screen was simple. Survive. That was the only objective. The system revealed that John had nothing except a basic wooden raft. No food, no tools, no supplies. John understood his situation. Waiting here would only lead to one result: death. So he started searching the ocean around him. If this world wanted him to survive, he would have to use whatever he could find. After searching for a long time, John finally noticed something floating in the distance. Small pieces of abandoned materials were drifting across the waves. They were damaged and almost useless, but they were the first resources he had found. John carefully reached for the floating materials. Every movement was dangerous on the unstable raft, but he couldn't waste this chance. Slowly, he collected the scattered items and brought them onto his raft. Looking at the few materials he collected, after spending hours collecting whatever he could find in the endless ocean, John finally had his first small supply of resources. Inside the wooden storage box were a few broken wooden pieces, pieces of rope, and empty containers. They were nothing valuable, but in this endless sea, even the smallest item could decide whether he lived or died. With no weapons, no equipment, and no way to escape, John had only one choice. Use the materials he found and create something useful. Using a piece of driftwood and a broken plastic piece, he carefully made his first survival tool. It wasn't strong, but it was the first step toward surviving this ocean. John knew that waiting on this raft would eventually lead to his death. So he decided to use his handmade tool and search for more supplies. Slowly, he pulled floating debris closer and discovered that the ocean was filled with abandoned materials left behind by unknown survivors. After collecting more materials, the mysterious system appeared once again. It confirmed John's progress. For the first time since arriving in this world, John felt that survival was actually possible. But the system also reminded him of one thing. The ocean would never stop testing him. As darkness covered the endless ocean, John checked every resource he collected. A few pieces of wood, some rope, a little food and water. It was far from enough. But John understood something important. Survival did not begin with having everything. It began with using whatever you had. The first night was the hardest. With nothing but the sound of waves surrounding him, John sat alone on his small raft. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know if anyone else survived. But giving up was not an option. Then, in the middle of the silent ocean, John heard something beneath the raft. The waves suddenly changed. Something was moving below him. For the first time, John realized the endless sea was not empty. When morning arrived, John inspected his raft. The waves from the previous night had weakened one of the rope bindings. Using the rope he collected earlier, he repaired the damage before it became worse. Every mistake in this ocean could cost his life. After repairing the raft, John activated the survival system. The results were clear. His raft was still weak. His resources were still limited. But he had survived another day. With his supplies running low, John continued searching. Far across the ocean, he spotted something floating on the waves. It was another piece of abandoned debris. A chance to survive. John carefully moved toward the floating debris. Using the handmade hook tool he created himself, he pulled the object closer. A broken wooden crate, a torn fishing net, and several empty plastic bottles. To someone else, they were garbage. To John, they were survival. While searching through the debris, John discovered a sealed container. Inside was something more valuable than gold in this world. Fresh water. A small amount, but enough to keep him alive a little longer. The survival system recognized John's discovery. Another resource was added. Slowly, step by step, the impossible task of surviving the endless sea was becoming possible. John knew that collecting supplies was not enough. His raft was still too fragile. Using the wood and rope he gathered, he reinforced the weak parts. A stronger raft meant a better chance of surviving tomorrow. As the sun began to set again, John looked toward the endless horizon. There was still no land. No rescue. No answers. Only the ocean ahead. But unlike the first day, John was no longer just trying to survive. He was preparing to fight for his future. The next morning, John continued searching the ocean. Then he noticed something drifting in the distance. A broken wooden crate, a damaged fishing net, and plastic bottles trapped inside. Another gift from the endless sea. Using the same handmade hook tool, John carefully caught the fishing net. The tool he created from simple materials was now helping him gather even more supplies. Every item he collected increased his chance of survival. After pulling the debris to his raft, John carefully separated what could still be used. The broken crate provided wooden boards. The fishing net provided rope material. The bottles could store water. Nothing was wasted. Some of the fishing net was tangled and unusable. So John used the small cutting tool he discovered earlier to remove the useful parts. The tools he created and found were slowly becoming the foundation of his survival. After organizing his new supplies, the survival system appeared. His resources had increased. His raft had improved. John looked across the endless ocean. He still had a long way to go. But now, he finally had a way to fight back against this cruel world. Another morning arrived. John had survived longer than he ever thought possible. But when he looked around his small raft, he realized the truth. This tiny piece of wood was never meant to be a permanent home. Before making his next move, John carefully checked everything he had collected. Every piece of wood, every rope, every bottle, every drop of water. In this endless ocean, wasting even one item could mean losing his chance to survive. While searching the ocean, John noticed something different. A damaged piece of an old boat was drifting in the distance. Unlike the small debris he found before, this one was much larger. It might contain the materials he needed. Using the ocean current, John carefully moved closer. The damaged boat piece became clearer. Broken wooden boards, old fishing equipment, and tangled nets covered in seaweed. A forgotten wreck, floating in the middle of nowhere. John used the only tool he created himself. The wooden hook. With careful movements, he pulled the fishing net and wreckage closer. From the damaged boat, he collected usable wood and rope, materials that could help him build a better future. The survival system appeared again. It confirmed the new materials John obtained. For the first time, he was not only trying to survive the next day, he was slowly building something. As the afternoon arrived, the ocean current became stronger. John noticed his raft moving differently. The waves were starting to put more pressure on the weak structure. He knew his raft needed improvement soon. John inspected the raft and found a weak rope connection. Using the rope he collected from the fishing net, he repaired the damaged binding. Every repair bought him more time. But the raft was still far too small. As the sun began to set, John continued searching the endless ocean. Then he saw something drifting far away. Another sign that this ocean was hiding resources. John used his handmade hook once again. The tool he created from simple materials was becoming his most important possession. He pulled the floating debris closer, and collected more supplies from the ocean. The next morning, John noticed something unusual. Among the ordinary ocean debris, there was a strange wooden object covered with seaweed and old fishing nets. But unlike everything before, something inside it was glowing. After carefully removing the tangled net, John discovered a hidden compartment inside the damaged wood. Inside was a mysterious crystal, a deep blue crystal with strange glowing lines moving inside. For the first time, the ocean gave him something that was not ordinary. The moment John touched the crystal, the mysterious object reacted. A blue light surrounded him. Then the survival system changed. A new function began to awaken. The system revealed a new ability. A summoning function. But there was a problem. His current raft was too small. Before he could summon any workers, he needed a place where they could survive. Looking at his tiny raft, John finally understood. The crystal gave him a chance. But opportunity alone was not enough. If he wanted help, he first needed to build a home. The next morning, John looked at the raft beneath his feet. It was only large enough for one person. There was no space for workers. No space for expansion. No space for the future he wanted to create. While searching the ocean, John discovered something massive. A destroyed fishing boat drifting through the waves. Unlike the small pieces of debris before, This wreck contained a huge amount of usable material. Using his wooden hook, John slowly brought the wreck closer. Piece by piece, he collected the broken wooden boards, thick ropes, and fishing net materials. Everything came from the damaged boat. Nothing was wasted. With enough materials gathered, John began transforming his small raft. The old raft became the center. The new wooden boards expanded around it. Using the rope from the fishing equipment, he slowly created a larger floating platform. As the sun set, John stood on his new raft. It was no longer just a piece of wood floating in the ocean. It was the beginning of a real base. The survival system finally recognized his progress. The space requirement was complete. Now, John could finally call for help from another world. After gathering enough materials from the destroyed fishing boat, John finally completed his first real floating base. It was no longer just a tiny emergency raft. Now, there was enough space to survive, and enough space for new companions. John carefully placed the mysterious ocean core crystal onto the wooden platform. A familiar blue light spread across the raft. The survival system immediately analyzed his work. His raft had finally met the minimum requirements. The summon system was now available. The system revealed a completely new function. Instead of weapons or equipment, it offered something far more valuable. Worker goblins, small creatures that could help gather resources and build a future together. Without hesitation, John activated the ocean core crystal. Blue light gathered above the raft. Moments later, the first goblin worker stepped onto the wooden platform. John had officially gained his very first companion. The crystal glowed once again. A second summoning circle appeared beside the first goblin. Another worker answered the call. From now on, John would no longer face the endless ocean alone. John immediately assigned each goblin a specific responsibility. One would help collect floating debris from the ocean. The other would organize every resource inside the storage box. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was the beginning of teamwork. Although they finally had workers, a much bigger problem remained. Their food supplies were almost gone. If they couldn't find a reliable source of food, none of them would survive for long. Using the rope from old fishing nets, leftover wood, and the metal he had found earlier, John crafted a simple fishing tool with his own hands. Every material had a purpose. Nothing went to waste. John lowered the handmade fishing line into the endless ocean. The weight felt endless. Then, the line suddenly became heavy. His very first fish, their first real source of fresh food. Catching food was only half the battle. John gathered the dried seaweed and dry wood they had collected before. Patiently, he created fire by hand. After several attempts, a small flame finally came to life. As the sun slowly disappeared below the horizon, John cooked the freshly caught fish over the small fire. Together with the two goblins, he shared the very first warm meal since arriving in this endless sea. For the first time, the raft truly felt like home. The next morning, the system appeared once again. This time, it wasn't giving instructions. It was offering a challenge. Survive, gather food, protect every companion. Only then would the system grant an even greater reward. John quickly organized the team. Goblin A would collect drifting debris from the ocean. Goblin B would organize supplies and maintain the base. Every member now had a role. Their small floating home had become a working settlement. Hour after hour, the goblins faithfully completed the tasks John assigned. More wood, more rope, more useful materials. Little by little, the floating base continued to grow stronger. After completing every objective, the survival system acknowledged their hard work. A brilliant blue magic circle appeared across the raft. Their reward was finally arriving. Blue light covered the wooden platform. Then, a small wooden shelter appeared out of thin air. It wasn't crafted by hand. It was a special reward directly materialized by the system. At last, John had a safe place to rest. Peace never lasted long. As the morning waves became rough, something enormous circled beneath the raft. The system immediately issued an emergency mission. Their first monster battle had begun. John remained calm. Using the wood collected from the destroyed fishing boat, he crafted a simple wooden spear. The two goblins armed themselves with sturdy driftwood clubs. None of their weapons were perfect, but they were ready to fight. Without warning, a giant fish monster burst from the sea. Its sharp teeth and powerful body threatened to destroy the raft. The goblins rushed forward first, buying John the opening he needed. While the goblins distracted the monster, John seized the opportunity. With all his strength, He drove the wooden spear into the ocean fang fish. After one final violent struggle, the monster finally stopped moving. Their first battle ended in victory. The defeated monster dissolved into countless blue particles. Moments later, the familiar system window appeared. Mission complete. Their reward was ready. Another major step toward survival awaited them. A massive blue magic circle surrounded the entire raft. The floating platform expanded in every direction. The shelter grew larger, and the base became strong enough to support an even bigger future. John looked across the endless ocean. This was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond the horizon, even greater challenges were waiting. While sailing across the endless sea, John and his goblins discovered a mysterious abandoned ship hidden beyond the fog. Using their tools, John pulled a damaged wooden box from the ship and discovered items left behind by a previous survivor. Inside the abandoned ship, John found a forgotten message, revealing that someone else had already faced the secrets of this endless sea. After discovering the survivor's message, John realized the abandoned ship was more than just a wreck. It was a clue left behind by someone who came before him. John carefully explored the damaged ship with his two goblins, searching for anything that could help them survive the endless ocean. Inside the ship, they found useful materials hidden among the wreckage. Every resource they collected brought them one step closer to survival. John and his goblins returned to their floating base and carefully stored the recovered materials, preparing for the challenges ahead. But the abandoned ship still held secrets. As the ocean core crystal began to react, John discovered that the endless sea was hiding a much greater mystery. The impossible mission had begun. John searched every material he already owned, believing the answer was hidden in what he had. Instead of waiting for luck, John carefully studied the endless sea, looking for a solution no one had ever imagined. Then an idea came to him. If there was no land, he would create his own foundation on the ocean. John and his two goblins prepared the materials, taking the first step toward building a floating kingdom. But the system made the challenge even harder. He now had limited time to complete the impossible mission. Without wasting another day, John began building the first foundation using only the resources he had collected. The first design was unstable, but failure only gave John a better understanding of what he needed. Looking at the empty plastic bottles, John finally discovered a way to make the floating foundation more stable. Working together, John and his two goblins strengthened the structure little by little until it could finally float. The system recognized his progress. It wasn't a complete farm yet, but it was the first real step toward building a kingdom on the endless sea. Although the floating platform was complete, the system refused to recognize it. John knew something was still missing. Using only the materials they had collected, John and his two goblins improved the platform one piece at a time. After hours of work, the floating farming platform was finally complete. The impossible mission was almost within reach. The ocean core crystal examined John's creation. Moments later, the system finally acknowledged his efforts. As a reward for completing the impossible mission, the system granted John his very first farming seeds, the beginning of a true sea kingdom. From a tiny emergency raft to a growing floating base, John's kingdom had already come farther than he ever imagined. And this was only the beginning. The ocean core crystal suddenly glows and reveals a new kingdom mission. A small sea monster appears near John's floating base and attacks their peaceful home. John and the two goblins fight together, using teamwork to defeat the dangerous creature. After completing the mission, the system rewards John with 2 bags of floating cultivation soil. John opens the storage box and prepares the soil, seeds, and materials needed to create their first farm. John spreads the floating cultivation soil onto the farming platform while the goblins help prepare it. Before planting, John and the goblins make sure the floating farm is stable against the ocean waves. For the first time, John plants a seed into the special soil, marking the beginning of their first crop. From above, their small floating kingdom shows its newest addition, the first farm platform. The system presents another challenge: increase the kingdom's population. John learns that goblins will not increase automatically and that they need proper living conditions. John realizes that a true kingdom needs more than survival, it needs a home for its people. The system identifies a location where a goblin tent can be built. John checks their supplies and discovers they do not have enough materials to complete the shelter. A damaged wooden cargo pallet is spotted drifting toward the floating base. John uses his wooden hook tool to catch the drifting cargo. John and the goblins carefully salvage the useful wooden rope from the damaged pallet. The recovered materials are stored safely, bringing them one step closer to building a home. The floating kingdom prepares for its next construction project. John begins building the goblin tent using the collected materials. The wooden frame of the tent slowly starts taking shape. The structure becomes stronger as John and the goblins continue working together. John discovers that more materials are still needed to finish the shelter. The unfinished goblin tent stands beside the shelter, showing their progress and remaining challenge. A large broken boat section appears drifting through the endless ocean. John and the goblins pull the wreckage closer using their tools and teamwork. They salvage the useful wooden beams and ropes from the broken boat. With enough materials collected, John finally has what he needs to finish the goblin tent. The recovered materials are prepared beside the unfinished structure, ready for construction. John and the goblins continue building the goblin tent. The wooden beams and ropes are secured, making the shelter stronger. The goblin tent is finally completed, giving the two goblins a place to call home. The system recognizes that the goblin housing mission has been completed. John's floating base has become more than a survival raft, it is becoming a real settlement. The ocean core crystal activates and reveals John's next reward. The level 3 floating base upgrade begins, expanding the kingdom around the original raft. The floating base transforms into a much larger kingdom foundation. The original raft remains at the center, showing how far John has progressed. Standing in the middle of the endless ocean, John's kingdom enters a new stage. The ocean core crystal reveals another impossible kingdom mission. John checks their supplies and realizes their next challenge is securing enough drinking water. While the goblins continue fishing, John studies the endless ocean for a solution. John begins designing a method to turn seawater into fresh water. The system officially starts the mission: create a permanent freshwater source. John begins his first experiment using only the resources already available. The seawater heats up as John tests his first idea. The experiment produces only a small amount of freshwater. John realizes his first attempt is not enough to support a growing kingdom. Although the mission has not been completed, John refuses to give up and continues searching for a solution. After the first freshwater experiment failed, John carefully examined the result. Only a few drops of water were collected, far from enough to support their growing kingdom. The system analyzed the failure and revealed the problem. The water collection method was too inefficient. John looked at the endless ocean and started thinking of a better design. Instead of giving up, John studied his failed machine and searched for a solution. He drew a new design that could collect more freshwater. The problem was not creating steam. The real challenge was capturing enough clean water from it. John checked their limited supplies inside the storage box. They only had simple survival materials like bottles, rope, wood, and fishing equipment. With these resources, building an advanced freshwater system would not be easy. The ocean core crystal analyzed John's idea and provided a new hint. The system explained that their primitive method was not enough. To improve the machine, they needed better components from abandoned equipment hidden somewhere in the ocean. With a new objective, John prepared for a search mission. The floating kingdom continued moving through the endless sea. While the goblins handled fishing and farming, John began searching for materials that could save their future. John stood at the edge of the floating base, watching the waves carefully. The ocean was vast, but somewhere out there might be the missing pieces they needed. The search for freshwater components had officially begun. Using their tools, John and the goblins searched around the floating kingdom. After hours of searching, they finally discovered something drifting on the waves. A damaged object that might contain useful parts. John pulled the floating object closer to the raft. With the help of the goblins, they carefully secured it without damaging the equipment inside. Inside the damaged container, John discovered old metal tubes and glass parts. These materials were exactly the kind of components needed to improve the freshwater system. Their search was finally paying off. John stored the recovered materials beside the storage box. The freshwater project was no longer just an idea. With these new components, the chance of success became much higher. John studied the materials together with his original design. After analyzing everything, he realized these parts could greatly improve the desalination system. A better machine was finally possible. John created a new blueprint for the upgraded freshwater system. This time, the design was more efficient. The seawater would be heated, the steam would travel through tubes, and the clean water would be collected separately. Construction of the improved system began. John worked carefully while the goblins helped prepare the wooden supports and materials. Every part had to be placed perfectly. After many hours of work, the upgraded freshwater prototype was finally assembled. But building it was only the first step. The true test was about to begin. John started the first official test of the new machine. Steam slowly rose from the seawater container. Everyone watched silently, waiting to see if their effort would succeed. John explained how the machine worked. The heat turns seawater into steam, while the salt remains behind. The steam then cools down and becomes fresh water that can be collected. The freshwater system began operating. Seawater entered the machine, steam traveled through the metal tube, and the first drops started forming. The entire kingdom waited for the final result. John carefully checked the collected water. The ocean core crystal analyzed its quality. The result appeared. The water was safe. For the first time, their floating kingdom successfully created fresh water from the ocean. Food, shelter, and water were finally secured. Their small survival raft had taken another step toward becoming a true civilization. The system recognized their achievement. The freshwater mission was complete. As a reward, John received new kingdom development points and unlocked the next stage of growth. The ocean core crystal released a new reward. A blueprint for expanding their floating base appeared. John looked at the empty ocean around them. Their kingdom was ready to become even bigger. Blue energy surrounded the floating base. The expansion process began. The original raft remained untouched as new structures started forming around it. The floating kingdom continued expanding outward. New wooden beams strengthened the foundation, creating a larger and more stable home in the middle of the ocean. The expansion was almost complete. John walked across the newly created deck and realized how much their kingdom had changed. What started as a small raft was becoming something much greater. The final stage of the upgrade approached. The new space created endless possibilities. For the first time, John had enough room to build a real civilization. The level 4 floating base was finally complete. The kingdom now had a stronger foundation, more space, and a future beyond simple survival. But the endless ocean still held many mysteries.